What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Believe in Jets podcast. I am your host, DTereman. Today, I am joined by one of my favorite draft analysts. Everybody in Jets community knows him. He is Dom C of Jets X Factor. Thank you so much for hopping on, Dom. How are we doing tonight?
I'm good, Dylan. It's been a while since I think you and I have been on a pod together, so I'm looking forward to this, man. It's always good to chop it up with you, whether it's Jets, whether it's draft, whether it's life, or anything like that. You're one of the guys that I'm always happy to spend some time to speak with. So happy to be here, dude.
I appreciate that. And for those who don't know, Dom and I share an Airbnb every week in Mobile. So Dom and I are very
close. Very close.
Yes, we are in lockstep a lot during the draft. And this is just a sign that the draft is coming quicker than we thought as Jets fans. So today what we're going to get into on the pod is we're going to go over Dom's top 5 quarterback prospects for the 2026 NFL draft, with a huge caveat that this is just his rough rankings. There is nothing set in stone, and a lot is still unknown about this class as it sits the first week of November. So getting right into it, Dom, if you have any honorable mentions that you want to rattle off just before we get into the actual top 5.
Well, I think I should start by saying this before your comments blow up. These rankings, like you said, are really rough draft. I have not finished film review on Cole Payton from North Dakota State. I have not finished film review, like my evaluation on Ty Simpson from Alabama. So those guys aren't involved in here in this rankings. Now, could or should or will one or both of them make my final top 5? We'll find out. But I didn't think it was right to and Dylan, you know me, like I'm not going to just speak on a prospect if I don't really form my own evaluation, which is why I'm not going to talk about Ty Simpson today. So all you Jets fans who are all gung ho and you know hyped up about Ty Simpson, I hope there's reason to be. I'm just not there yet, just because I'm not finished with him. So I wanted to specify by that, you know. And you talked about like honorable mention. There's some guys that I think are good. Like I'm going to say this. Although not first round caliber guys, I think you got to give. I got to pay some flowers to John Mateer from Oklahoma. You know, I'm curious to see if he goes back to school. He does have a year of eligibility left, but man, that guy's just a gamer, dude. He's just a gamer. I love the energy. I love the athleticism. You know, he's got such a live arm. You could tell that that's just a dude. You know what I mean? Like, that's a dude that's going to win football games, you know, through hell or high water. You know, a little bit smaller of a frame, you know, only 6 foot tall, but built kind of, you know, short and stocky and like that, you know, at 220-ish pounds, but runs well. You know, I'm wondering if he's going to go back to school, but I think you can, you know, I got to pay him some respect. I'm also going to pay some flowers toward Lenore Sellers. Now, I'm going to say this, Dill, not my favorite prospect that I watched. You know, him and Taylon Green from Arkansas are probably on that same tier of guys who I think right now are just better athletes than they are quarterbacks. You know, but I'd be remiss to say that if Lenore Sellers goes back and gets into the right program and gets the hell out of South Carolina and gets into the right program, you know, there's definitely moldable tools there to be had. I just don't think he plays the position well yet. Like I said, the way he, you know, maneuvers around the pocket and the escapability is like really, really high level stuff. You know, the way he can, you know, help out an offense, you know, with using that big body in the run and that huge howitzer he has on the end of his shoulder. I think that's legit. It's the little things. It's the accuracy issues. It's working through the progressions in the middle of the field and that kind of stuff that I still think he needs to improve. So I'm hoping that he goes back to school. I'm hoping that he transfers out of South Carolina and gets with a quarterback coach or a head coach that can really kind of put the fine tunes and finishing touches on him. So
yeah, absolutely. And as it pertains to like both those guys, you mentioned remaining eligibility. And I think that is a common theme with a lot of these top guys. I know there's some in your top 5 that have years remaining that they could return back to school. So ultimately, you caveat the entire conversation with these guys are not locks to come out
Correct.
in 2026. But when you talk about Mateer, and it's not lazy scouting because they're both Oklahoma guys, you say gamer, and my brain goes Baker Mayfield. When I'm watching them in game as quarterbacks, as runners, as just athletes, they look very similar. Now they have very different traits altogether, but there's so many similarities in game between the whistle that remind you of Baker Mayfield. And then Lenora Sellers, yeah, he's just super athletic. Sometimes the top half doesn't match the bottom half, and that leads to a lot of his inaccuracy issues. But like you said, that strong arm that you can just whip it 60 yards on a rope and it'll get there, hopefully to Nick Harbor. But I do agree with you. There is an overwhelming sense that he should return back to school and likely leave South Carolina and Shane Beamer's offense. So unfortunately, yes, those are two guys that I've watched myself, and I'm not fully there yet on them being the choice if the Jets were to select them. And I do hope that they go back to school because I want to see more of their development in a college program rather than them trial by fire in the NFL and flame out by year 3 or 4. And now we're talking about these guys as busts. Go get yourself the best development possible, the best coaching possible at the college level, and be ready for the NFL, maybe come the 2027 draft. So with that, we'll get into your top 5. Yep. You said that you have slight tiers, so we'll go 5 and 4 first, and we'll talk about those guys in that first bucket.
Yeah, my 5th quarterback is Cincinnati quarterback Brendan Sorsby, who was the Indiana quarterback, transferred out of Indiana. Again, another guy who I'm not sure if he's coming out. Redshirt junior, got another year. He's a name that's going to creep as we get through and closer through the process of this draft cycle. There's a little bit of buzz about him just because, he looks the part still at 6'3", like 230 pounds. He's solid, and he's not fat and he's not, whatever. He's just built real big. He's got that NFL body. He's ready to go. Sturdy, thick, can take some, can take a lick, can take some punishment. You don't have to worry about it. The beautiful thing is a guy that big, and again, not comparing him, but he's got a little Josh Allen in him because he can, work with his legs as well. He's definitely an above average runner. I don't know if he's, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, like true dual threat like that, but he will gain some yards with his, you can call quarterback power. You can use him in goal line and short yardage situations to gain that stuff. And to boot, he's got a really good arm, at being big. He can, 6'3", 6'4", he can see the whole field. He uses, he's got an above average arm. He pushes it really, really good vertically. Layers it when needed. Like I said, you want to see a little bit better. I want to see a little bit better with the anticipation stuff and kind of leading his receivers or throwing receivers open. He does a good job getting the ball there. Throwing them open is a little bit, at times one of his, I think areas that he can improve. I think a lot of that has to do because the mechanics aren't they're not crystal clear. There's still a lot of choppiness and separation. Like the feet don't match the shoulders, which don't match the eyes at times. You know what I mean? So a lot of the time, and listen, it can work and that can get fixed because that was Big Ben a lot of the time. Like, I don't know if you remember Big Ben in the college days and early Pittsburgh, where he literally would look like he'd be pointing this way and throwing this way, like just pure, like brute arm strength. So
yeah,
I get
wonky.
Yeah, I get a lot of that from Sorsby. Tough physical dude. Like I said, I want to see him develop a little bit more. Like I said, he's definitely needs to work on his mechanics. I want to see him develop raise that QB IQ a little bit, like the way he understands what's happening pre-snap and getting through those progressions and processing team. His trigger seems to be a hair slow at times. Which is why he's, rifling it as opposed to being a little bit early and kind of leading his receivers open, so on and so forth. But, he's got the makings of an NFL quarterback. Not a guy I want to turn the keys over to for sure from day one. but a guy that, checks the boxes in terms of physical traits, arm strength, the pocket presence and awareness and all that stuff that you want the quarterback. The processing needs to be cleaned up. The mechanics need to be cleaned up a little bit. And I think you'll have something. So although he didn't grade out, with a super high grade for me, I think quarterbacks always get overdrafted. So I got a late day 2, early day 3 grade for Sorsby right now. I'm looking forward to seeing how he develops through the rest of the year and what the final say is going to be on him. But even with a late day 2, early day 3, he's a guy that I think you're going to see, come January and February and March in the mock season. There's going to be a lot of buzz for him hopping into that end of that first round possibilities. Like just like Jackson Dart hopped into the end of round 1 last year. I could see something like that happening with Sorsby if somebody really believes in the nuts and the bolts of what he is as a quarterback now, and with an understanding that they can fix him and don't have to kind of give him trial by fire and kind of let him groom into the quarterback of the future. So he's a guy that I think if he comes out will be a name that you're going to get very familiar with between now and April.
Yeah, I just did a quick snapshot of his stats, and he has a 21-2 touchdown to interception ratio this season, just over 2,000 passing yards, and also 450 yards on the ground. So you're talking about a slight dual threat in a way, right? And like you said, he's got that big mobility, stature. He can take a hit. It looks like he can take a hit based on the images that I've seen of him. And it looks like he is the perfect caliber quarterback for the Senior Bowl. So hopefully you and I get to see him up close in February. So. Yeah. And moving into your number 4, who you view in a similar bucket as Brendan Sorsby, you have
Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. I was hoping that Garrett Nussmeier, coming out of last year, coming into the summer, he was my number 2 quarterback behind Cade Klubnik. And I was hoping that Garrett Nussmeier really took off and became the number 1. Now, this was before, and we'll talk about some of the other names, the Sorsbys of the world and so on and so forth really came out of, it seems like for people not really in tune with, the draft world, it seems like they came out of nowhere. The Mendozas and the Moores and the Sorsbys of the world. But Nussmeier's been here for a while. He's a name that's been familiar. And you watched him last year, and, I thought that there was something there. That, like, he had that it, but it seemed to me sometimes that it went away, and he looked like a deer in headlights. You know what I mean? You watched him make 2, this is going back last year. I would watch him make 2 throws that, just were like, wow, that's NFL stuff right there, Crisp ball to the sideline from the far hash where only his receiver can get it, where he throws the guy open before he even breaks, that kind of stuff. And then you watch him, under a little bit of duress or a little bit of pressure, get happy feet, not plant his feet, and just kind of, just choke, in other words, and throw, just trying to get rid of the ball, just pretty much hand it over to the defense. So you wanted to see some of that stuff cleaned up. And we came in the first LSU game this year. I think you saw it, right? And you saw a lot of tendencies on what Garrett Nussmeier really brings, the arm talent and the accuracy, the experience, the high QB IQ. You're going to hear me say that a lot, because that's something that, that is one of the main focal points when I'm watching somebody, is how smart, how can they play? How smart are they? How are they, up top? And I think Nussmeier really has that. Now, obviously being the son of a quarterback's coach, doesn't hurt that. But he shows that, understanding of what's happening, the processing abilities, the ability to get from 1 to 2 to 3 back to 1, to be a full field quarterback and not a half field quarterback. All that stuff you saw it last year in glimpses. You saw it game 1 this year, and then it just kind of flatlined, right? It just kind of flatlined, and I don't think Garrett Nussmeier has been bad. A lot of people want to label him and Klubnik this year to be like to be bad quarterbacks. I don't think they've been bad. I just don't think that I just think other people have, surpassed them, right? Listen, Nussmeier's going to have to almost play picture perfect football to be successful at the next level because he's kind of small. The arm talent is good, but the arm strength is kind of, questionable. There's a definite physical ceiling on him. He's not the best athlete he's not the best athlete in the world. And the fact that, going into this thing as he's getting ready to, finish his collegiate career, you're still talking about the ups and downs in his play, game to game. There needs to be developed a true effort or oomph in developing consistency if he's going to be a starting quarterback in this league. So, listen, you put him in the right scheme with the right offensive mind, in a West Coast horizontal passing offense, where he can throw with beautiful anticipation. And, he knows exactly where these guys are going to be, and he's not going to be asked to, play off platform and whip something down the field 50 yards like guys like, Dante Moore can do with ease or Lenore Sellers can do with ease. That's not Garrett Nussmeier's, game. So, but you put him in structure, you put him in something horizontal based, West Coast style offense. I think he could be good. I like him a lot to Brock Purdy. And I'm not saying that because they're both, smaller white guys. I just think that that's the kind of game and that's the kind of QB that I see Nussmeier developing into, a leader, a true leader, a guy who makes good decisions, who's going to, who can protect the ball, just going to be limited, physically and athletically.
Yeah, the limited exposure I had on Nussmeier from this season, my notes were quick decision maker. He can get the ball out fast when he sees it. He does a good job getting to the check down in a collapsing pocket. Easy fluid mechanics, can use multiple arm angles. Top and bottom half are connected except for when facing pressure, and he relies too much on just his arm. And like you said, there's not enough arm strength there. There is arm talent, certainly, but when you're relying on arm strength and that's not your forte, and you're not throwing from a sturdy, balanced base, it makes it a lot harder to make those throws, especially from the far hash. And I know those throws are more college throws than NFL throws, but there is an element of Nussmeier's game that, to your point, it is more horizontal based. You don't want to see him stretching the field vertically as much, although at times he can do it. You mentioned the anticipatory throws, which is one of my favorite attributes in a quarterback. The only example I had, he missed the mark on a back shoulder comeback anticipatory throw, but I have seen clips where he does make good anticipatory throws. So I just want to see a little bit more consistency from Nussmeier. And I think that if people have him higher than 4 on their boards, I wouldn't be surprised, because in certain systems, this type of quarterback works. Whereas in the totality of all 32 teams, they're not always looking for this style of quarterback. So I can agree with Nussmeier not being number 1, but not needing to be all the way down at the bottom of the list. And I think 4 is a good place to put him.
Yeah, so, and he grades out, like I said, he grades out with a day 2, a late round 2, early day 3 grade for me, which is fine, and a guy like that, you get a round 2 grade, there's a chance he can go in the first round, if the scheme fits him properly. Like, would it surprise you if Sean McVay, who's got 2 first round picks, kind of does what they need to with their first one, and then late, when they're picking 28, 29, pluck a guy like Garrett Nussmeier to kind of just sit and learn behind Stafford for the next 2 years before he turned the reins over to him. I mean, that's beautiful.
100%. I can see Nussmeier throwing it to Devontae Adams in the red zone like Stafford is doing exactly right now. Obviously, the deeper pass game would have to come along with Nussmeier, but that does sound like a really good fit. So your next bucket of quarterbacks, number 3 and number 2, you have in similar views. So Let's start with number 3. Who do you got?
I got Dante Moore from Oregon. And listen, this is a guy I think that a lot of people from, who are just now starting to get into college football or the draft cycle are really going to watch and fall in love with, because there's a lot there. There's a lot to like. Like, he is your, if you like fun, loose style of quarterback play, that's Dante Moore. Like, we talked about arm talent with Garrett Nussmeier, right? Dante Moore has arm talent, but I mean, he also has arm strength, like the velocity that he throws to, the deeper intermediate, so it's nothing flutters, the ball gets there, it gets there exactly. He's got a laser quick release. You know what I mean? He just sets and boom, the ball's out. I love the presence that he has in the pocket. His head's always up. Again, everything's, feet, the feet match the shoulders, which match the eyes, which is always a good thing. He's a transfer from UCLA, so he's had it, and he's seen a couple different situations, in different offenses and different scenarios. And for a young kid, only 21 years old right now, you can tell that, he is, wise and mature beyond his years. Like I said, the football IQ, the QB IQ is really, really good for a kid like this. He's got good feel. He understands you see him adjusting, see him looking what he's at pre-snap, adjusting post-snap. You see him looking off safeties with his eyes and stuff like that. And the next guy we're going to talk about is really the champ of that. I in some pressure situations this year, especially, you'd like to see him perform a little better. Like, the Indiana game was a real pressure situation for him. Big game, two big quarterbacks, and I thought he fell a little flat at times. Played a little too much hero ball. Gets, the decision making gets a little wonky under duress, which is what you want to really try to work on. But you talk about pro style quarterbacks. You talk about C.J. Stroud, like C.J. Stroud-esque. Like, that's exactly what I see in Dante Moore. The arm talent's there, the leadership qualities are there. He needs to eat a cheeseburger. I think they say he's 200 pounds. I'd be remiss to say he's probably, $185 soaking wet. So you think you need to put a couple pounds on him, somebody feed him. But, he's got legitimate, he's got a legitimate franchise quarterback for an organization, traits and qualities. Again, young, definitely not going to come out, or definitely not a guarantee to come out. But I think when it's all said and done, and he goes in front of the committee and he realizes that he's probably going to be a top 10 to 15 pick at worst, I think he's going to come out. So I know all the Oregon fans in the world don't want him to come out, but man, you get Dante Moore. He throws a pretty ball. He can move around that pocket. You watch him. You watch him control the line of scrimmage, control the offense. He's got everything, other than probably, the physical traits that you want in a true starting franchise quarterback. But listen, they said the same thing about CJ. They said CJ was a little on the smaller side, right? We saw Bryce Young get drafted, 5'6" overall, or no, number 1 overall. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
He went number 1 overall, and he's 5'11", 190 pounds. So he's not too small, but you'd like to put a little bit of meat on those bones so you can take a hit. So Dante Moore is going to be a good player. He's got a first round grade for me. And like I said, it doesn't matter, even though it's a late first round grade for me, doesn't mean that he's going to go in late first round. Like, I could see him as one of the top 3 quarterbacks taking this draft, and that could be in the top 12 picks.
Yeah, absolutely. And some sites have him listed at 6'3", 210 pounds. So
I don't think he's too. I don't
no,
even.
the discrepancies on his weight have been pretty all over the place. So you're saying 185, 190, maybe we'll just give him 190 as like a nice gesture. But
yeah,
that's a 30-pound swing of weight for a quarterback. And I would like to think that he has a little bit more mobility than a CJ Stroud, but I can see all the other traits matching up with a CJ Stroud type. You're talking about a former 5-star as well, recruit for Dante Moore. I watched him against Penn State, and I thought he played very well from the pocket. He's one of my favorite throwers of the football. He can
he's
truly
one of the
just
best.
spin it.
Yeah, he absolutely has one of the prettiest deliveries. And and again, speaking about the Jets here, Dylan, think about, everyone gets on. Well, some people are getting on like Olu and stuff like that because he's letting up pressures, this and that. He's given the quarterback 3.5 seconds, almost 4 seconds to throw. Imagine when you have a guy like this who's got that quick release and can just fire it out. Like, there'll be no pressures on him.
Yeah, it'll look more like the Aaron Rodgers led offense where the ball was out immediately and the offensive line looked better for it. But now you have a better offensive line and a quarterback that makes the offensive line look better. And I certainly agree with that. And another thing about Dante Moore from the pocket, a very fluid base. And when he breaks the pocket, I think he does well off platform still with his arm angles. And, he could be 3 toes on the ground making a throw across his body, and it still looks super pretty coming out. So yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite throwers of the football. I think he can really spin it. I want to see a little bit more anticipatory throws. I didn't see a ton on his tape, and maybe that's just Oregon having guys running wide open.
Yeah, Oregon is always going to be that 4 verts kind of stretch the field kind of stuff. But man, he's one of the few quarterbacks that I've watched so far, one of the few in Dante Moore, that I think that he's not scheme specific. He could play in a vertical press, a vertical style offense. I could see him in Buffalo's offense. I could see him in, I could see him in a Shanahan offense. I could see him, doing other things and really, really stretching the ball vertically, as well as, playing in that West Coast kind of timing based stuff. I think Dante Moore can do both of those.
Yeah, he seems like a very good schematic fit for the Jets, but obviously a lot needs to go into it. And he's only a redshirt sophomore, so he still has eligibility. So with that, moving on to your number 2 guy who you view in the similar light as Dante Moore, who do you got at number 2?
Darian Mensah from Duke. Now, this one comes with a big asterisk because he's very young. There's a chance that he definitely there's a very good chance he goes back to school. Okay, I will say that. I think he's a redshirt sophomore. I think that the fact that he signed a 2-year NIL deal, which is very rare, they're usually year to year. The fact that he signed a 2-year NIL deal will make me think that maybe that will play into it. But man, I got into, I started watching him and I just could not stop. Like, there is an NFL player like tucked into that 6'3", 210-pound body, Darian Mensah. Again, transfer. Most of these guys are, that's going to be the word of the day because they all hit the portal. But started in Tulane, transferred to Duke this year. In Tulane, I think he had like 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but the completion percentage was above 70%, right? He's repeating those numbers, especially the completion percent range, and probably throwing less interceptions this year at Duke, stepping up his, game. It's a much, much different environment. Not that, not that the talent at the Duke or that he's playing the ACC is, light years better than at Tulane, but it's definitely better. He's just does everything that you want a quarterback to do. And we'll talk about with Mendoza later on. But the ball placement that Darian Mensah has is just elite. It really is elite. The accuracy and the ball placement that he plays with is absolutely to die for. He's not the most mobile guy. He's not a statue, but he's not a guy that's going to really work it with his legs. But he's a high IQ quarterback, right? He knows what he's looking at. He knows how to draw the defensive backs. He knows how to set up the defensive backs, and the arm talent that he plays with is is just really, really high level. I can't wait to see him get a little bit more physically mature. Like I said, about 6'3", 210 pounds. I can't wait to see him get a little bit more physically mature and see how he develops even more. There's the upsides through the roof. Now, the downside to him, like I said, he doesn't have the strongest arm. I'd probably say it's probably right up there with in the Nussmeier range. Which is NFL. He can make the NFL throws, but he's not. He's not getting it there with the velocity and the explosiveness that some of these other quarterbacks have. The mobility and the ability to play off platform is something that's probably a little bit, I'd say, average or less than average. So you think that you'd like to see some improvements there. And again, he's now done it at two different schools. I'm curious to see if he makes the change or makes the jump to a P4, like a big time college from Duke, and goes somewhere in the SEC, and how he could progress from there. But there's a refined skill set and like crystal clean mechanics and a quarterback's head down there in Durham, North Carolina, playing for Duke. I think that this kid, if he comes out, would be a top 20 pick for sure.
Wow.
I like him. I like him just as much as Moore. I think Moore's arm talent is better, but I think the overall way that Darian Mensah plays quarterback is better than Moore. So right now for me, they're 2A and 2B.
Yeah, I'm looking at his stats right now, and you were correct. 22-6 last year at Tulane. This year, he has 21-2 touchdown to interception ratio, which is a total of 43-8 touchdown to interception ratio, which is just absurd. And listening to you describe the type of player he is, I haven't had any eyes on. I've watched Duke live, but wasn't really looking at their quarterback specifically, right? I was just looking at the entire product of the game. But the way you describe Mensah, would you think, and this obviously would need Lenora Sellers to leave South Carolina, but being from Durham, North Carolina at Duke right now, how much of it is it a big difference for him to go down to South Carolina and Shane Beamer's offense and probably take over for the Gamecocks? Me being a South Carolina kid now, I have to root for the Gamecocks. So is that something that could work schematically?
I was thinking Clemson, actually.
Ooh,
I was
okay.
thinking Clemson with Klubnik leaving.
Yeah.
Listen, I don't know if it would. After watching Lenora Sellers for 2 years in Frank Beamer's offense, I know they can Shula, but I don't know if I want any quarterback that I want to really work or develop to go down there. Now, and I've also heard the rumblings that James Franklin might be taking over at Virginia Tech. That I thought would be another option for him, but I don't want him working with James Franklin either.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So, listen,
that's completely fair about South Carolina, though. If you want a quarterback to thrive, maybe sending him to Columbia is not the best case scenario.
Yeah. So Clemson, and listen, he might stay at
Clemson would be great with Garrett Riley as the offensive coordinator, younger brother of Lincoln Riley. That'd be great. And for all those who loved Klubnik coming into the process, obviously he's had his shortcomings so far, but I think he's still, an adequate player. But yeah, Mensah could be an upgrade there in an offense that would very much accentuate his skill set.
Yeah, listen, you get a guy who's as efficient as Darian Mensah and makes the right calls and the right decisions all the time would really, really bode well.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that being said, and I think you teased his name at least once already this podcast, in a tier of his own, who do you have at number one?
Fernando Mendoza from Indiana, man. I've been, like I said, I know he's the hot name. I know he's kind of the guy that you want. Everyone, wants to go gaga over right now. But I think it's well deserved. There's a lot of Fernando Mendoza's game that checks all the boxes of what I think a perfect NFL quarterback does. The way he throws, the way he throws guys open, the way he throws balls where only his guys can get him, the way he changes his velocity, layers it over the second level, can, hit receivers in NFL windows, those tight windows. The process and skills are second to none. there's not a lot of Mendoza's game that I really don't like. And I think I'm very comfortable with that high floor kind of statue that he has. Like, that the bottom's not going to fall out. You're not getting yourself into a Zach Wilson situation. Again, we're scarred as Jets fans. We know what we've been through, and I want the complete opposite of that. But I went back and looked at Mendoza's film from last year at Cal when he had no offensive line, and he was outstanding. He made a lot of these same things, but played a little too much hero ball because he had to. So coming into this year in Indiana and Kirk Cincinnati, you wanted to see him different kind of offense. I wanted to see him change and really improve those ball skills and that protection, and he has. You know what I mean? He's been everything that you saw the progression. At least I saw the progression from Cal to here, and he cleaned up everything he had to. And for me, that to me epitomizes the kind of prospect I want to hitch my wagon to. Now, he's not the most mobile, but he's functionally mobile. You know what I mean? He can maneuver. He'll scramble here and there. You're not gonna run straight RPOs with him. And the deep ball is it's good. His arm strength is good, and the accuracy is okay. He's not asked to do it too much, so it can be a little bit hit or miss. But from that intermediate, from that 20-yard in, like, he's money, man. To me, I think he's the bee's knees in this quarterback class.
Yeah, he is the model of anticipatory throws, in my opinion. I see them littered all over his tape. Somebody in the Jets community gave me the comp, and I didn't watch Sam coming out of USC, but Sam Darnold. And the first thing I thought of was Fernando doesn't get happy feet. Sam Darnold played with the most erratic footwork, but it worked for him specifically. Yeah. Mendoza's feet are so comfortable in the pocket. They're always pointed to where he needs to throw. He doesn't get happy and lose his base when there's pressure.
The mechanics are fluid. Listen, sometimes he gets a little choppy when he's pushed off platform, or he's got to escape. Sometimes the mechanics get a little bit choppy, and that just could be angst or the nerves kicking in. So there is room for improvement, but what he does so good, and you just put him back there. And again, thinking Jets, specifically for the Jets, you put him behind the wall that you have behind Membu and Olu and Tittman and everyone else, where he's going to have time and he can just let it rip. I love it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You take those still shot pictures of Justin Fields with some of those pockets he has around him, and then you just insert a guy like Fernando Mendoza who can make all the reads and do all that and make all the throws, right? I don't think his arm strength is elite, but he has the arm talent, right?
Yeah, he's an 8 out of 10, I think. A 7.5, 8 out of 10.
Yeah, and to me, I would prefer a guy, like you said, with a higher floor that has arm talent over a guy with higher ceiling who has arm strength. I think you can use a guy like Mendoza in this Jets offense in a way that can really accelerate this, hopefully not a 2-year rebuild that we're about to see under Aaron Glenn. So I think Fernando Mendoza would be my number one, written in complete pencil right now. I've only studied 8 guys, and half of them were coming into the season, so it's from their 2024 tape. But with the 3 games that I watched of Mendoza, 2 of last year and then the one this year, I watched the matchup against Oregon because I thought that was one of his best games in terms of competition and performance. I came away really impressed. So I'm excited to watch all these guys. Any final notes on this group as a whole, and anything else you have to add on the quarterback class before we get out of here?
No, it's a fluid class, man. You're gonna have a lot of people who have different opinions. I don't know if there's a lockdown number one right now, but it's gonna be deep. There's gonna be guys that can play in the league coming forward, and I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of the draft cycle and getting into them even more.
Yeah, I think not having a consensus number one bodes well for the Jets right now, who don't have their pick locked up, but it looks like they're trending towards locking in a top 5 pick. So perhaps they get the 3rd guy off the board, but it's their number one all along. So we'll be keeping a close eye. I will certainly be having Dom back on the channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and let them know real quick before we get out of here where they can find you.
All my draft content is Jets X Factor, www.jetsxfactor.com. And as we get into November and December, you'll see a lot more content put out on my personal channel, Project Prospect with Dom C.
Absolutely. For Dom C, I am Dylan DTereman. Thank you for joining another episode of the Believe in Jets podcast. We will talk to you again next time.